Welcome back to OLC 4.0. This is term 1B. We are on class 22, working on assignment 35, number 1 to number 4, and working on quotations for our grammar. It is Monday, January 22nd, and 2023. Oh, sorry, hang on, it's changed 24. And I'm Jillian Percy. Here is my contact information. Most important one is, of course, if you want to send me work, studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Please always include your full name, course name, assignment number, and name. If an assignment asks for both a rough and a good draft, please label which is which and include them both in the same email. If you have a question about an assignment, you can email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You can also call the office at 1-800-667-3703. I am extension 2211. If you're wanting to see a previous recording, those are posted on YouTube, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space WAHSA. If you need to take a photograph of an assignment, which I know happens sometimes, please send it as an attachment in the email rather than just putting it directly into the body of the email. It's kind of hard for us to print off sometimes. It doesn't always show properly on the computer. Okay, so today's work, we will learn about the rules of how to format quotation marks for dialogue correctly. We'll apply our knowledge of the rules in order to edit a paragraph that is missing punctuation. We will also understand the main point of a news article, put a news article in chronological order, and apply our understanding of Chapter 9 and news articles to create a news report about Chapter 9. We will also be following the writing process to create both a rough draft and a final copy of our news report. Assignment 35 is quite a big assignment. It's worth about 52 marks. So there's 4 different exercises. Do not feel like you've got to tackle it all in one go. It's fine to spread it out over 2 or 3 days because it really is quite a big assignment. Okay, so I'm not going to include all the information that was in the unit. They kind of do a review of the different types of nonfiction and fiction. I'm just going to kind of summarize here. There are many different types of nonfiction or factual writing that can include dialogue or direct quotes of what people say. So some types of writing that might include dialogue would be things like biographies, autobiographies, newspaper articles, interviews, poetry, informational texts, historical records, and accounts. Now, the rules for dialogue in nonfiction are exactly the same as dialogue in fictional writing. It doesn't change. There are also many types of fictional writing, which is creative writing about imaginary events that would include dialogue or direct quotes of what people say. So some types of fictional writing would include things like legends, myths, short stories, novellas, and novels in all sorts of different genres like mysteries, thrillers, horror, romances, fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction. Okay, so the word dialogue comes from the Greek language. Dia means through, and logos means words. So thus, a dialogue is a form of writing that consists of a conversation between 2 or more people. The most obvious example of a dialogue is a play or a TV show where the story gets told through the conversation of the characters rather than through any kind of a narrator or description. There are very specific rules for the punctuation of dialogue, and the pages that follow will give you an overview of the rules, as well as some examples of using punctuation with dialogue. Keep in mind, the rules about quotations in speech are followed regardless of whether the words are fictional or real. They are also followed regardless of writing format or form, with the exception of plays and certain types of interviews, which would just set off the words using a colon rather than quotation marks to indicate speech. Those are kind of an unusual item. So quotations or quotes often use what is called a tag. And a tag tells us who is speaking and how they're speaking. And tags can come at the beginning, before a quote, in the middle of a quote, or at the end of a quotation. And so here is kind of an example of if it's at the beginning of the sentence, then just like always, you would have a capital letter. And so this is talking about he. We don't know who he is, but he. And how is he talking? He yelled. And then a comma. And then after that, you would do your quotation marks and the person's speech. Same thing here. She whispered, comma. The principal shouted, comma. The teenager muttered. So if it comes at the beginning, we always use a comma after the tag and before the quotation marks, and we also put a capital on the very first word of the sentence. If the quote comes in the middle of the words, sometimes you'll have something like, "No," said Peter, "I won't come with you." So there's words on each side of the tag. In the middle, there's no comma before the person the tag is listed. But there is a comma after. There is no capitalization at all here, and there would not be capitalization in the quotation marks that are continuing unless it started a new sentence. If the tag comes at the end, after you've quoted the speech, again, there's no comma beforehand. You would just put the tag, and then I'm going to say normally it's a period, but if it was some other type of capitalization, sorry, punctuation, like a question mark or exclamation point, you would put it there. It's not as common. But anyways, he yelled, she whispered, principal shouted, the teenager muttered. So the primary difference between middle and end is simply at the beginning of a sentence, the person or the pronoun is going to get a capital letter. Okay. So sometimes we are reporting actual speech, whether it's real speech or imaginary speech, and all the rules about quotations will apply to these situations. These are called direct quotes, where we're trying to write exactly what the person said. Occasionally, when we're writing, we report what someone said in a general way, rather than as an exact quote of actual words. When we do that, we don't use quotation marks, and we do not need to worry then about following any of these upcoming rules. This is what's called an indirect quotation. Usually it means that somebody's reporting what someone else said in a general way. They may be summarizing. They're not necessarily trying to use the exact words. They're just trying to get the message across. So here's an indirect quote. Dad got mad and said we needed to play ball outside. If it were exact speech, it would be more like, Dad said, go play outside. Another indirect quote, we don't need to wait for Sarah because she said that she wasn't coming. If it were a direct quote, we would say something like, Sarah said, I'm not coming. So that's kind of the difference. Like one is somebody telling everybody what a person said generally. One is the actual quote of what they said. All right. So there's a whole bunch of rules. Some of them are a bit obscure. I'm just going to kind of go over them. Number one, using quotation marks. Use quotation marks to begin and end a direct quotation, but not an indirect quote, which we just kind of covered. The first word inside the quote is capitalized. Because it's the first word of the character or the person's sentence, it also gets the capital just the way a beginning of an actual sentence would. If a tag comes at the beginning of a sentence, it is also capitalized and then followed with a comma before the quotation starts, like Jack said, I win. If a tag comes in the middle of the sentence, it is not capitalized, but it is followed by a comma. But here you can see they capitalized the first word in the quote. And because this is a new sentence, they also capitalized the first word in the second half of the quote. If a tag comes at the end of a sentence, it is not capitalized and it is followed by normally a period, okay? So I win, said Jack. If the quoted speech ends in a period, but the overall sentence isn't done yet, we generally just use a comma. Like we don't use a period in the middle of a sentence because it can get confusing. So for example, you see I want hot dogs, comma, she said, and we save the period for the very end of the sentence. However, if the person is talking and they're excited, so we want an exclamation point, or they're asking a question, so we're using a question mark, we would still use those to make sure we're conveying the emotion or the volume that they're going to be speaking at. These would still incur inside the quotation marks. So you can see here, can we have hot dogs? We put the question mark and then the quotation mark. And there's no comma then, and we just have the tag. Same thing, I hate hot dogs. Here's the exclamation point, and then the quotation mark, no comma because it's at the beginning, and then just she said. When the end of the quotation is also the end of the sentence, then the period falls inside the quotation marks as long as the original sentence would have used a period too. This is also true for a question mark or an exclamation point. So he said, we'll get into the supper line now, period. And you wouldn't need to like put an extra period there because you've already got a period. Same thing here. She asked, can we go home now? One question mark will do. He yelled, help. The only time you might have a period word would be if you were reporting that somebody asked a question, but you weren't necessarily asking a question yourself. But generally, you would see it like this. When the original sentence ends in a different puncture mark than the quotation is using, simply put it after the quotation marks. Put the correct punctuation for the quotation itself inside the punctuation marks. So here are the exceptions. Did she really tell you, get out of here? So the girl spoke loudly with an exclamation point, but the person talking is asking you a question. I can't believe he said, my real name is James Bond. So here, the guy is talking with, he's just making a statement, right? My name is James Bond. So that's ending with a period. But the person talking is saying that they're surprised, they're excited. And this could be like a narrator, it wouldn't have to be actual dialogue or speech. Both parts of a divided quotation are enclosed in quotation marks. And the first word of the second part is not capitalized unless it begins a new sentence. So for example, we've got this soup, and we've got the quotation marks around the first part, and then we've got the tag, the elder said, and then he keeps on saying the same sentence, finishes his sentence. Tastes just like my gookums. In this case, we don't need a capital. If he started a whole new sentence here, then you would need a capital. Quotes within a quote. If you need to have one character directly quoting another character, then use double quotes for the main dialogue and then single quotes for the quote within a quote. So it sounds a little bit confusing, but let's say you're reading a novel and the one character is talking, but they're reporting what somebody else said. So here he's saying, and then he said, this is your last chance around here, Jimmy. What a jerk. So here in the middle with the single quotes is what that other person said to Jimmy. Here in between the double quotes is what the person is saying. And then he said, what a jerk. So that's a bit tricky. I don't think you're going to see that super often, but it does occur. When you write dialogue, begin a new paragraph whenever the speaker changes. That way, even if there's no tag, which doesn't all right, there's often not a tag, we can still tell who's talking. Sit down, she said. Let's talk. Are we going to do this every day? What? What do you mean, what? And it's assumed here, because you know how dialogue goes back and forth. She's talking, he's talking. It's assumed here that she's talking again. If you are the writer, you want to make sure it's clear. So if you think there's going to be any confusion, you would put she said or her name, Diane said. But sometimes when you're reading, you might get confused and the writer just thought it was really clear. So that does happen. Use a pair of dashes to indicate an unfinished statement or question. Like if the person talking gets cut off and they weren't quite finished, rather than putting a period, which would imply they'd stop talking and might look like a grammatical mistake, instead you would put a dash to show that they aren't finished. It might get continued later, or maybe it not. Maybe if the conversation changes, the person never gets to finish what they wanted to say. So, for example, here we have, first of all, he said, if you can learn a simple trick, son, you'll get along better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Now, that little dash, I'm going to put a little space there to make it easier to see, is showing that he wasn't finished talking. But then his son interrupts him and goes, huh? And then he finishes his sentence. And so they put a dash here to show that the until is not the first word in the sentence. They're right in the middle of a sentence. And again, I'm going to put a space there. until you walk 2 moons in his moccasins. And then finally, we're getting the period because the sentence is finally over. Again, this isn't super common, but it does happen. Okay, number 11. When you're writing only a part of a quoted sentence, like let's say you're doing a research essay and someone gave a big long speech, don't begin the quotation with a capital letter unless the person you're quoting had also capitalized it, or it's the very first word in your sentence, like you're starting with the quote. Sometimes you can also use an ellipse, those dot, 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 to show that it's not a complete sentence. So here we have Robert Checkwich admitted he had not found many novels that were based in First Nations communities. So here, technically, I think we should have a comma there. Um, this was like the middle of his sentence. It isn't the first part. We don't know what the first part is. So they don't capitalize it. Here, oh, hang on. This should look a little bit different. I apologize. What we would do here is put the tag second, and this part comes first. Now, if this part comes first, we would put a capital because it's the very beginning of a sentence, and our eyes just kind of like that visual marker that a sentence is starting. I would still include the ellipse to show that he was not talking, and you would have to rephrase this, right? Because this sounds really awkward right now. It does not make a whole lot of sense. That we're based in First Nations communities. Robert Checkwich admitted he had not found many novels. Doesn't make sense that way. But you could do it as a technical thing. Okay, so here's the beginning of assignment 35 and exercise 31. Okay, this 31, there's actually 2 slides. It's only worth 6 marks. So don't stress out if you're missing a few of these. It's not an enormous assignment. It's just kind of a practice exercise to help you learn how to do punctuation for quotations. So use all the rules we just talked about. There's also a page in your unit called Punctuating Dialogue and Direct Quotation, a dozen rules to help you punctuate the following dialogue. The first 2 lines have been done for you. Don't forget to capitalize some words as well. And there's often more than just the quotation marks missing, which we'll talk about in a second. So here we have Kelly and Frank on the phone, and they've put a colon here. Quotation, hey Kelly, comma, quotation, Frank said, comma, quotation, what's up? Question mark, quotation. All those things were like added, but they'll be missing in other ones. Same kind of thing. Quotation mark, hey Frank, period. I'm just sitting around, comma, hanging out, comma, quotation mark, she replied, period. Now you can see they've dropped the punctuation, or at least some of the punctuation. So you're going to have to decide what part is the person's direct speech and what part is the tag. So for example, when we've got the word, that's cool, did you hear what happened to Kara? He asked. Well, there's my tag. So I know that this part is my direct quote. And there's already a period here, so I'm okay with there. There's already a capital here, so I'm okay there. And I don't need a comma there because there's going to be a question mark. So we've got, no, what happened? She asked. Well, he said, I heard she got expelled. For what? She exclaimed. She brought in a knife or something like that, he replied. I bet somebody turned her in, Kelly said. Probably, Frank said. So you got any plans for Friday? Yes, Kelly said. Why? Do you want to offer me something better? I don't know what you have planned, he said, but I was thinking about you and me getting together and doing what exactly? Kelly asked. I don't know. We could hang out, Frank said. If you don't know, then why did you ask? She asked. Try again when you think of something better to say. Now, be sure to fix all the mistakes. Don't just add the punctuation marks. So some things to be aware of. There may be end punctuation missing, like periods, question marks, or exclamation marks. There may be commas missing. In fact, I can guarantee you there are commas missing. Obviously, punctuation marks are missing. And you may need to put a capital at the beginning of a sentence or at the first word in a quote. So don't assume that if it's a lowercase letter that that's correct. think about the rules and think about whether it should be capitalized or if it's already been capitalized correctly. So that is exercise 1. Okay, so we're going to do a little mini practice here. Put in all the missing capitals and punctuation. John said, let's go to the mall. Okay, so here's my tag. So I know that there's going to be quotation marks going around here. Because it's the end of the sentence, I'm going to put the period inside the quotation mark. And because it's the first word John says, I'm going to make it a capital L. And here John said, I'm going to put a comma. So now that is punctuated correctly. So you see, I had to add comma, punctuation mark, capital, period, quotation mark. So it's not just a matter of the quotation marks. No way, said Peter. I don't even have any money. Okay, well here, said Peter is right in the middle of the sentence. That's our tag. So I'm going to make sure to put quotation marks around the first part of the quote, and then quotation marks around the second half of the quote. Okay. Again, I'm going to put a period here because it's the end of the sentence, but I'll put it inside the quote. No way should be capitalized because it's the beginning of the sentence. I don't need a comma there. Said Peter. If Peter is still talking, then I would put a a comma there. It's already a capital because it's the word I, so it doesn't really matter. If I wanted to make this a separate sentence, like no way, then I would put a comma inside the quotation mark there too. We can just window shop, said Josh. Said Josh is the end, so we can just window shop is the direct quote. Put the quotation marks around it. I need the period at the end of our sentence. And let's see, capital here because it's the first word in our sentence, and a comma here because it's the end of his speech, but we're still in the middle, so we don't want to put a period there and get confused. Let's go down to the skateboard, not park here. Instead, said Peter, we can go to the mall tomorrow when I get paid. Okay, so said Peter's in the middle of the words. So I got to quote, put quotation marks around the first part of the speech, and then quotation marks around the second half of the speech. And while I'm here, I'm going to put the period, and again, I put it on the inside of the quotation marks because it's the end of the sentence and I don't need to double up. Now here, this sounds to me like Peter is starting a new sentence, so I am going to give it a capital. Peter is still talking, so I'm going to give him a little comma. The L needs to be a capital because it is the beginning of the sentence. Oh, there seems to be, yep, the contraction there. Let's go down to the skateboard park instead, and I'm going to put a comma. He's not really excited or asking a question. All right, last sentence. John said, okay, let me grab my skateboard from the garage. So here we've got the typical, the tags coming at the front. So then we put a comma and we put the quotation marks that enclose it. And again, we're going to put the period on the inside of the quotation mark. And what else do we need to do? Okay. Oh, the front word inside the quotation also needs to be a capital to show that it's the beginning of a speech. So this is the kind of thing you're going to do on the previous 2 slides. What a lot of people do, they don't write it all over. They just kind of correct it on the page and then take a picture and send that to me in an email. You're welcome to write it over if you want to, but that can take a little while for some people. Okay. So here is exercise 2, which is also worth 6 marks. Here they want you to skim or scan the news report Anishinaabeg received complaints over HST to answer the following questions. Number 1, what is the main idea of this news report? Phrase it in 1 sentence if possible. Make sure that you don't just list the topic, but the overall main idea about the topic. Now, this is only 2 marks, so you don't need to spend an enormous amount of time on this part. So for example, if I said the Avengers movie was about the Avengers, I would really just be telling you the topic. I'm not telling you the main idea. Instead, I should say something more detailed, like the Avengers movie is about how a group of superheroes who enjoy working alone learn to work together as a team to fight forces of evil that would overcome them individually. Okay, so now I'm telling you the main idea or the main plot of the story. And here is the news report they want you to read. Again, the title is Anishinaabeg Receive Complaints Over HST. Thursday, September 2nd, 2010. Rick Garrick, Wawate News. So Rick Garrick is the writer. The Anishinaabeg Nation is calling for retailers to honor point of sale tax exemptions after community members reported being gouged by companies. Even after the province has sent out notices informing businesses that they must honor the rights of our citizens on and off reserve to tax exemption, we are hearing stories of companies trying to gouge First Nations customers, said Grand Council Chief Patrick Madaby. These retailers are now breaking their own government's laws as well as ignoring First Nations rights. Anishinaabe Aski Nation representative said only one case was reported of a business not honoring the tax exemption. Most businesses throughout northwestern Ontario have been honoring the tax exemption. Ontario's 8% PST, which is provincial sales tax, and the federal 5% GST, which is the goods and services tax, were harmonized into the 13% HST, which is the harmonized sale tax, July 1st, with a goal of providing a competitive advantage to businesses within the province. I don't really understand why it provides a competitive advantage, to be honest, but anyways. Although First Nation citizens had to pay the HST since July 1st, a last-minute agreement was reached with the federal and provincial governments by First Nation organizations and groups. The agreement said that First Nation citizens in Ontario are exempt from the 8% provincial portion of the 13% HST. The argument also called for retailers to honor this tax exemption effective September 1st. Madaby encouraged community members to call their local member of provincial parliament to provide them with the name of any business refusing to respect the point of sale exemption to the 8% provincial sales tax. This was part of the deal we negotiated with Ontario. They accepted responsibility for ensuring that all businesses in the province complied with their tax regime, Madaby said. We showed Ontario that we were prepared to take to the streets to fight for our rights. We are also prepared to fight for our rights in stores and malls if necessary. First Nation citizens can apply for refunds of the taxes they paid throughout July and August by filling out refund applications, which were to be made available after August 1st at band council offices and online at the Ministry of Revenue website at www.ontario.ca/tax change or by calling 1-866-668-8297. Refund applications, which need to be submitted between September 1st and November 1st, 2010, must contain the original sales receipt and a photocopy of both sides of the status Indian card, or in the case of Indian bands and councils, a letter from the band or council certifying the consumption of qualifying off-reserve supplies for band activities. And then they give you the little the URL where you can find the original article. Okay, so exercise 2, after you've read the article, is go through the story to determine the sequence of events. That is, the order in which the events leading up to the news story actually happened. You may be surprised to see that they're not reported or written in chronological order. So don't just write down the order they happen in the paragraph, because that is not the chronological order. That's just the order they talked about it in. Remember that news articles are written in order of importance, right? So they always put the most important thing up top, which may not be the first thing that happened. They don't worry about the chronological order, which is like the sequence of events organized by time. So look carefully at the dates mentioned in the article to put the events back into the correct chronological order. Listing the dates right next to the event helps make it really obvious. To get started, look for the earliest date mentioned throughout the article, and then keep going by listing events and the date until you get to the last or farthest date along the time. So you're going to have to kind of skip around a little bit in the paragraph. That's what they're trying to get across. Don't just put it in the order that they wrote it in, because they didn't write it in chronological order. Okay. Exercise 3. This one is worth 10 marks. Write an opinion paragraph based on the information provided in the news report. Notice, as you read the news report again to get ideas, that the news report itself is free of opinion. It is only the quotations from the people involved that contain opinions. Use the organizational chart, checklist, and rubric to guide your writing. It is really important that you do not just try and summarize the article. Exercise number 2 really covers a lot of that kind of information. What you want to do here is tell me your opinion, your thoughts, your feelings, and your ideas about the events that were described in the news article. So here's a little chart showing you the difference between a summary and an opinion. So a summary, the primary purpose is to prioritize and summarize the information in another article or story. But in an opinion piece, the primary purpose is to explain what you think or feel about information or events that you read about. A summary should stick only to the facts and to information that are actually in the text itself. So you wouldn't include things that you happen to know because you saw it, or things that were in a different article. You would only include what's actually in that article itself. But for opinion, you should make connections between the text and your own experiences or events that occurred in the real world, or maybe some other articles that you read that connect to what you're reading about. A summary will only include the most important facts, and they may not mention examples or details. Here, they will use examples and details from the text, your life, your thoughts, and your feelings to support your opinion. So here's the checklist for an opinion paragraph. Does it have an opening topic sentence that states your opinion? Not just the topic of the paragraph, but your opinion about the topic. Have you included at least 5 to 7 details explaining your opinion? And then do you have a concluding sentence that summarizes your opinion? It might summarize like your main ideas why. Do all your sentences have a subject and a predicate? Have you included a variety of sentence types? Simple, compound, and complex? Have you checked your spelling? Have you checked your punctuation? Have you stated your opinion really clearly? Is it really obvious? Like anybody who could read it could tell what you think. And have you backed up your opinion with examples from the text or with personal anecdotes that would relate to the same topic? So if, for example, you had experienced a retailer not honoring the tax exemption, maybe you want to reference that, right? Or if you tried to get a refund and you were not successful, you might discuss that. Okay, and so that brings us to exercise 4. This is the biggest part of assignment 35. It is worth 30 marks. So here, you have to use all the information and the examples you've read in the course so far to write another news report using the writing process. So again, a news report about what happens to Gary in chapter 9 of the novel Jimmy Comes Home. There may be still some details that you have to make up, but be sure that the story flows and makes sense. Remember that you can only make up details that are not already mentioned in chapter 9. So for example, if they give the name of a policeman, you can't just give him a new name because you want to. You could, however, make up quotations that you think characters might have said, even if they weren't quoted directly in the chapter. Use the rubric we're going to talk about in a minute to help guide your writing. It should be around about a page, maybe 3/4 to a full page. You are to submit a rough copy, which will be worth 10 marks, and a final copy, which will be worth 20 marks. Overall, this is worth 30 marks. Please take your time with this one as it is a major assignment. Because it's like the 4th item in the assignment 35, I've had a lot of people hand in like a paragraph. And then I've got to kind of say, sorry, that's not enough here. I can't really mark this. You need to redo it. So always look at how much the marks are when you're doing an assignment. Obviously, an assignment that only is worth 2 marks is just not going to require much time, whereas an assignment that is worth 30 marks is going to require a little more significant time to make it work. Okay, so in the rubric for the lesson, they kind of split up assignment exercises 1 to 3 into one section, and then exercise 4 into a different section. So 4 is kind of all by itself because, again, it is worth so much more in marks. All right, so really important, remember the news article format. Remember how there's the upside down triangle? The lead up top contains the most important information. The body or the middle will contain the next most important details. And the tail, or the little tiny bit at the bottom, is going to contain other information. This is the kind of stuff where if a big news story suddenly happened and the editor needed to cut things short, they would cut the tail off, right? That's why they do it this way, because occasionally, like if war broke out or a nuclear accident happened or something, that might suddenly need to take a bigger priority on the front page. And this article that was going to take a big chunk now is going to take a much smaller chunk to make room for the more important story. So your lead is the first sentence or maybe the first two, and it should include most of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, maybe not the how. Maybe not the how. The how might come kind of later on. The body will break down the event into more details and may include quotations from major people in your news story. So for example, you might want to have a quote from Gary because you're talking about what's happening to Gary, or maybe the policemen are saying something specific about Gary. Maybe there's counselors who are talking about Gary, or maybe Gary's family might have something to say. So people that are important to the main character or the main event. This is going to flesh out the lead. It's like you're doing a close-up to show all the important details. This part might be more in chronological order. This would be like the most important thing. What was the big thing that happened? This might kind of go into the more details and break it down more chronologically. The tail includes details that are less important or items that might need to be followed up on later and have not been completed yet. So if there's going to be jail time or if there's going to be sentencing and it hasn't happened yet, this is where they might mention that it's going to happen, but because it hasn't actually happened, it's not considered as important, for example. Okay, so do you remember back in when we did assignment 12? Assignment 12 was when we first wrote a news report checklist. So I wanted to bring that up here because it's the same, it's the same type of writing. So I don't use this as my personal rubric. I'll show you the rubric I do use in a minute, but this is a great way to just check, hey, do I have all the parts? And if the answer is only somewhat or no, then you need to revise your writing until you could confidently answer yes each time. Is the headline short and catches the reader's attention? Remember that newspapers don't have a lot of room, so they're not going to have a really long-winded headline normally. A date is included in the report. It's really common for the news report to have a date right at the very beginning. Is it an appropriate who? Remember that who could be more than just a person. It could be a group or an organization or a town or a country. Like if they were reporting about the war in Russia, right? They wouldn't necessarily have to quote or talk about an individual soldier. They might just talk about the general war in Russia, and Russia would be the who. The what, when, where, and why are correct, and they make sense. Remember that why goes into talking about reasons. It's the kind of word that you're going to see a lot of. Because this happened, this is what happened as a result. The how should demonstrate understanding of the event. Like, how is the event going to be carried out? How are all the details getting finished? How I find is kind of one of the trickier ones sometimes for people to talk about. It just means like, um, by what instrument or by what people is everything occurring by, essentially. The quotes are thoughtful and appropriate to the event. And again, it is totally okay to make up the quotes if the appropriate people aren't mentioned. So maybe you want to have a quote from Gary's mom, even though she's not necessarily mentioned in the actual chapter, but she might have something to say about the events that happened, right? And what happened to her son. The level of detail demonstrates considerable understanding of the event. So you don't want to be so vague that I'm not even sure if you read the chapter. You would want to include a lot of details that make it clear to me that you understand what happens, that you understand what was important, and that it's a good news report, right? Okay, so as you're writing, remember finished working on audience, purpose, and tone. So first of all, who is your audience? If this were the article that you're writing now, if it was going to be printed in a local paper, such as the Sioux Bulletin or Wawate News, who do you think would be most interested in this news? Who would be reading this story? Would everyone be reading the story, or would it be more interesting to certain people? What is your purpose in writing this story? Remember, I know the actual purpose is, okay, I'm handing this article into my teacher for marks, but you're pretending to be a reporter. And if you were a reporter, what would be the reporter's purpose? And generally, a news story's primary purpose is to inform people about current events. Reporters are generally not supposed to give their own opinion on what they report, although they can quote other people who give their opinion. So a reporter couldn't say, this is a disgrace. That wouldn't be appropriate. That's not what the reporters are called to do. But if the reporter interviewed, say, a council member who said it, then the reporter could report that. They could say, Council member Amy Trout was frustrated by the events and said, this is a disgrace. When will the bootlegging stop? So the writer may agree with that person or they may disagree. That doesn't matter. If that person was important to the story, then they report them regardless of whether they agree or disagree. At least that's what they're supposed to do. I don't know that it always happens, but that's what they're supposed to do. What is an appropriate tone for your writing? Should the tone be formal or informal? Is it serious or is it casual? So think about who you're writing to. That's where you go back to thinking about your audience, because who your audience is changes who your tone is or what your tone is going to be. Okay. Remember all the writing skills that we have learned up to now. Don't throw them out just because they haven't done a lot of explanation of the assignment. They're expecting that at this point in the course, assignment 35, that you've kind of begun to internalize all the work that we've done on writing process and grammar. So remember that every sentence has a subject, a who, where, a what. Every sentence has a predicate, which is the verb, plus words that tell us what is happening. Sentences can be simple, compound, or complex. It would be weird in a news story to only have simple sentences. So please try and make an effort to do compound and complex sentences. Correct punctuation must be used, including the rules about quotation marks, which we talked about at the beginning of the class. Check your spelling, check your capitalization. Remember that news articles must have a headline. You will lose marks if you do not remember to put a title or a headline there. 3/4 to a full page seems an appropriate length. Okay, so before you start writing, think about the viewpoint. What would a reporter actually know? For example, something that one of the boys did or said while they were all by themselves, they probably wouldn't know that unless you think that the boy would tell the reporter about it, right? Who would the reporter have talked to? If you were a reporter and the events in chapter 9 happened, who would you get quotes from? Probably more than just the two boys that are involved. Who else might have some important quotations or some important commentary or might have very strong feelings about what happened? By the same token, so who would you quote? Would some people's opinions be more important? And in which case, whose? Who do you think a reporter would prioritize. What events in the chapter do you want to focus on? And have you covered all the major events? So major would be the kind of thing where it's probably for the community's good to know that particular detail. Something that was only relevant to one of the boys and didn't really interest or matter to other people probably wouldn't be included. So you have to kind of think about prioritizing what is major events and what are minor events. So here is kind of my checklist. These are the kind of things that I would be looking for. Did you use the news article format? Did you include the major events from the chapter? Did you include the title? Are your quotations appropriate? Did you manage the viewpoint realistically? In other words, did you write as if you were a reporter? Did you avoid giving your own opinion? This one's really important. Did you obviously do editing on your spelling, punctuation, and capitalization? And did you obviously do revising, sentence structure, word choice, paragraphing, grammar, adding details, or cleaning up longer sentences? So remember that for this assignment, the good copy is worth twice the amount the rough copy is. And one of the big things I'm going to be looking at is the good copy significantly different? So in other words, not just like 2 or 3 words got crossed out and maybe one capital, but that you made a real effort to polish up your writing and make it sound as best as you possibly can. Okay. If you don't, it is going to affect your marks. So you might get a good mark on the rough copy because it was okay for a rough copy, but then as your final copy, it doesn't quite meet the expectations because it's assumed that your good copy is going to improve a lot over your rough copy. Okay, this is the rubric from assignment number 11. Actually, you know what? Maybe it was number 12. I'm not sure. Anyways, I generally use this to mark this assignment because it's the same rubric for a news report. So it's what I feel like you should kind of already know you're going to be marked on. So we're looking at things like your knowledge and your understanding. Do you demonstrate limited knowledge of the event, some knowledge of the event, considerable knowledge, or thorough knowledge of the event? Thinking and inquiry. Headline, quote, limited evidence of thinking skills, some evidence of thinking skills, considerable evidence of thinking skills, or excellent evidence of thinking skills. Communication, so full sentences, proper paragraphs, and grammar. Limited use of appropriate writing skills, some use of appropriate writing skills, considerable use of writing skills, and thorough use. And then application is just sometimes you can know it, but maybe you apply it not quite as effectively as other people do, where other people may do a really good job with applying what they understand about a news report. So transfers their skills to the context of a news report with limited success, with some success, with considerable success, or with excellent success. So I was away for a little bit in the hospital, and we've only got really a week left of term. So I'm going to have to condense some of the assignments over this week to make sure we get all the assignments covered. But if at any point in time you feel like you weren't given enough information, you can either call me, you can send me an email, or you can also check out on YouTube. I have the Term 1A classes, which may go into more detail. So if you feel like you need a little bit more to understand the assignments, by all means, check out Term 1B. None of the assignments change at all. All that changes is how much time I spend on each assignment, right? Some things I spend a little more on in Term 1, and other things I spend a little more time on in Term 1B. So it just really depends. So thank you so much for coming out and listening. And I hope this made everything really clear. Again, if not, just give me a phone call or shoot me a message. I'd be happy to explain whatever was confusing. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.